How are you guys doing today? Welcome back to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, Manny Maradiege, live today on Friday, August 30th. We officially start the NFL in less than a week, with the Chiefs hosting the Baltimore Ravens, and a week from today, the first ever Brazil game between the Eagles and the Green Bay Packers. But to close out this last week of the preseason, or the offseason, I should say officially, we got some more topics on hand to get to, starting off with Dak Prescott and his comments that he made just yesterday about his owner, Jerry Jones, and where he stands on his contract extension. Then also more on Brandon Aiyuk, not just the basic stuff on his contract, but what it could mean for Deebo Samuel, Trent Williams, and whether or not San Francisco does have enough time to pay everybody potentially on their roster. Then also down the line, we're going to talk about Micah Parsons trying to get a position group to earn a little bit more money, not pass rushers, but a different position. Stay tuned to find out what that is, and a couple more topics down the line as well. But with the fact that I mentioned that the NFL season is soon getting underway, there's more of an opportunity for you guys to get involved in this show. Now, with the game starting, there's a lot more things we can talk about, discuss, and what better way to do that with you guys than commenting, asking a question, or giving your opinion on anything I say in this episode, but also with the season just around the corner. And now we have a very easy way for you guys to go about and do that just by using the super chat feature provided on all the live episodes that we have. Just click the $sign at the bottom of the chat box to send in your super chat. This way, it guarantees that your message gets on the air, and it's also a fantastic way to support our channel. We rely on your support to keep bringing you the sports content you love, and we appreciate every bit of it. So go ahead, let us know what you're thinking. Hit the super chat button, and let's keep this show as interactive and exciting as possible. But also, if you've been watching the shows for a while, you do know we have an alternative option for you guys. You can use the old tip and donations link, gsmcpodcast.net, to still give a tip and donation there, obviously, but also send in your question or comment through that way as well. Overall, we couldn't do what we do without your amazing support, and we are so thankful for you guys every time you're able to use the new super chat button, but also just being involved with the channels as well. But now we can jump straight into this sort of always, obviously, right? Because one of the two most important extensions got done previously. CeeDee Lamb got extended. He becomes the second highest paid wide receiver in the NFL. And now the question moves over, the main spotlight moves over to Dak Prescott, right? With Micah Parsons still way down the line, or I should say just a couple years down the line, not too far down the line. Dak is really the main focus now, and everybody throughout the whole season, the next couple days until we start the regular season, are going to have Dak Prescott on their mind, and they're going to try and figure out, will he get an extension or not? Because it seemed like before CeeDee Lamb got his deal, it was already going to be tough based on the fact that they were taking this long to get one of their deals done. They get CeeDee out of the way, but now, what does that mean for Dak Prescott? You know, you have the questions, just our own questions, right? But also you have Jerry Jones mentioning on Wednesday, I believe, he said that we don't need to get this done before the season. So you always feel like, at least I do, when anybody says, I don't need to do this, I don't need to have this in by this time, it always feels like they're preparing you for the fact that, it looks unlikely to get it done by the start of the regular season in this case, right? So by Jerry saying that, again, it shows that lack of urgency that he kind of hinted at with CeeDee Lamb, mentioning that it's not an urgent matter to get him extended. And while they did get him a new contract, it does seem a little bit different with Dak, just because, like I said before, we're only about less than a week now for the start officially of the regular season. And while the Cowboys don't play next Thursday, they're still playing in 10 days or something like that, or actually, no, 9 days. So the time is really now to get this underway, because while they have 9 days for the game to actually start next week, in about 4 days, 3 days, it will be the beginning of an actual work week, right? You have to go in there, start preparing for the Browns, a very formidable opponent that you have to go and travel to Cleveland and try to get a win there in a very hostile environment. And now with Dak, it feels like we started to see a little bit of a shift. And what I mean by that is that he recently spoke to the Associated Press yesterday, actually, on getting a new deal and making some more comments on it, because obviously everyone's going to ask him where he feels the negotiations are at and things like that, right? But yesterday, he gave a little bit of a different answer than I'm accustomed to, and I think most people don't really expect from Dak. He said, what is it? I think it says a lot if it is or it isn't, when he was asked about his contract extension without one potentially. He said, I think it says a lot if it is or it isn't, but that doesn't really matter to me, to be honest with you. He then continued on. Somebody else asked him what it says if it isn't done. What does it say about the Cowboys? They didn't directly say the Cowboys, but you could obviously pick up on that. Asked him what it says about the Cowboys if it isn't done, and he says it just shows how people feel about you. And obviously he wouldn't go further into detail because it is pretty obvious who he was referring to by people. So pretty honest there, right? I think before this, everything Dak said, everything that he mentioned, he gave a pretty optimistic, positive, outlooking sort of answer, right? Like most quarterbacks do. I feel like giving the politically correct answer. It always felt upbeat, optimistic, and very hopeful that he was going to get it. It was just a matter of time. But now this, it's starting to seem like he is feeling a little bit frustrated by this. It's getting down to the start of the regular season, and if you think about it in Dak's mind, how everybody thinks of the quarterback position and seeing guys like Trevor, Tua, Jordan Love all get paid, he plays the exact same position to him at that same level. It obviously will produce some frustration, and that's sort of what you got here. But it was the next statement that, again, was pretty, what's the word I'm looking for? It was just pretty blunt, honestly, with what he said now about Jerry Jones, because they asked him about Jerry's remarks from Wednesday, and he said, I stopped, honestly, listening to things Jerry says to the media a long time ago. It really doesn't hold weight with me. And, basically, to me, other than the fact that it clearly just shows that there is, again, frustration there with Dak Prescott, I think it just shows to me the main message that I got was that it basically is a statement saying you've talked all offseason about getting this contract done, being positive, being optimistic, referring to Jerry Jones. Show me something now, right? Show me some action that you are actually serious about extending me. Stop listening to him, referring to Jerry Jones, obviously, in the media. It doesn't hold any weight with me. Not too many players would talk like that, I feel like, in regards to their owner. So you can definitely see more frustration there, especially if you compare it to CeeDee Lamb, with how he handled it compared to his situation, right? Because Dak has been there all offseason. He has been part of the voluntary stuff, been there through training camp. He's been a good sport about talking about his contracts, right? Whereas CeeDee hasn't been there, hasn't said a word about it. And, right, it clearly pushed the Cowboys to feel a little bit more urgent about getting his deal done. Very smart by CeeDee, but Dak felt that this way, maybe, I'm just assuming here, that the Cowboys would see that he is there, he is committed to the team, so they'll give him that extension as well. But clearly that hasn't worked, and now on top of these statements that he said, you have previous answers that he gave before where he has alluded to the fact of not getting that extension and being completely fine with that in the past. So hearing that and now hearing these more, I think, just very straightforward answers by Dak, I think now I'm starting to think of the question, is it time now to start accepting the fact that Dak, this could be his last year with the Dallas Cowboys? And I'm being, actually serious about that, right? Because it's been speculation now. He could hit free agency, but nobody really believed it, I think, before. But now, with these comments and the fact that the regular season is just about to start, and the fact, again, that Dak holds all the power, he has all the leverage, right? He can't be traded, he can't be franchise tagged or anything like that. with this frustration now, my fear is for the Cowboys, I guess, would be that he gets to a point where, he just says, forget about this team. I can decide my own future. They don't want to extend me before the regular season. That's fine. I'll just put my mind to it that I don't want to play here anymore. I'll finish this regular season now, and then that'll be it. He'll have all the power to do that and not have to worry about what the Cowboys say or anything like that, because they can't trade him again, obviously, and they can't franchise tag him. So if it gets to a point where this frustration sort of boils over, I think Dak could be in a situation where he just decides, like, I've had enough of this. I'm done. They don't value me. That's fine. I'll just hit free agency and I'll go. I'll stop hearing their negotiations. I'll stop hearing their offers and things like that, and I'll just leave after this year. And I think that's where we're getting to a point, and it feels like I'm trying to put it all on the Cowboys that Dak might be a bit of a victim here, and I'm not trying to get that point across, because Dak is certainly at fault for a good amount of the stick he gets and trying to get another high-paying contract, even though, of course, the lack of playoff success stands out, and, he already got paid. Now he's looking for another contract and not living fully up to the price tag that he already has, and he's trying to get now with a new deal. It feels like with both sides at fault here, it's hard to just point the finger at one Cowboys side or one Dak Prescott side. All of that culminated into one. I just feel like it's time for both to kind of divorce here, to just have a split, because I don't think we're going to get anywhere else by extending Dak one to a boatload of money. I don't think that's smart for the Cowboys, and for Dak and his situation, I think we've seen enough of this pairing to know that it's probably not going to get any better than what we've seen already, based on the fact that this team is worse than the teams that they've had over the last few years. And if you're going to commit to Dak for 3 or 4 more with a worse team, I don't know how you can think that the results are going to be any different. And Dak is a good quarterback. I just feel like now he's met his ceiling with this team, and I think it will do him pretty well if he goes out and joins another team, depending on who it is. Obviously, I'm not saying go join the Giants or anything like that, unless you're looking for just a ton of money. If you're trying to get success, it does depend on who you join after the Cowboys, and depending on who that team is, if it's anybody like, I don't even know, like the Raiders or something like that, or another team that will probably need a quarterback next year, thinking of all the options, deciding to hit free agency and have a bidding war, I think that's the best situation for Dak at this point. I think both sides have just met their limit with each other, and I think now a split, a fresh start with both of them does not seem as bad as it did at the start of the season, because the results aren't going to change that much, honestly, with Dak being your quarterback as opposed to somebody else. Yeah, it's going to get worse, but if it's not getting any better, are you just content with just staying the same for the next few years, just trying to not be worse? I think that's a bunch of questions that the Cowboys have to figure out here, but it seems like Dak is getting to a point where he's getting a little bit frustrated, and we haven't really seen that side of it that much this offseason. So we're going to move on. That's what Dak Prescott had to say on that subject, but we're going to continue on talking a little bit more about Brandon Aiyuk and his new contract. Great for the 49ers, great for Brandon Aiyuk this year, but what does it mean going forward after this year? With Brock Purdy's extension looming, what does it mean for Deebo Samuel? Where does Trent Williams fit into all of this? We're going to answer all those questions once we return after our first break.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits, I'm losing solution, shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. Oh,
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
We are back here now on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast to jump straight into our second segment. A continuation of yesterday, obviously when the news broke about Brandon Aiyuk getting his new deal and everything like that. We're going to talk some more about it, but just looking a little bit further than just the plain facts of the contract. I will remind you guys of what he got though. Yesterday, the 49ers and Brandon Aiyuk agreed to a 4-year, $120 million extension, $76 million guaranteed, averages out to about $30 million average salary per year, making Aiyuk the 6th highest paid wide receiver in the NFL, and just also based on how this contract sort of plays itself out. He will play this year on that 5th-year option, obviously, but then after that year, that new contract will kick in and will bump up his salary up around that 20-something million based on how much it is split between bonuses and things like that. So that's the plain facts about the deal, right? That's what he got in his new contract that he finally ended this entire saga with and can go forward now with being on the 49ers long term. It guarantees that he is part of this project long term because there were some questions, definitely, because when I brought up the subject yesterday, I was not planning on announcing that Brandon Aiyuk was going to stay. I was actually going to allude to the fact that I don't think it's going to get any better for the 49ers. I felt like it was going to take a turn for the worse based on the fact that Aiyuk did not show up to practice on Wednesday when both Shanahan and John Lynch thought that he would. But I was wrong. Brandon Aiyuk signs, and now talking about this and looking at the factors and all the reports that came out were pretty interesting on some of the rumors that were out there, because some reports suggest that it was really, again, down between the 49ers extending with them or being traded to Pittsburgh, but a straight-up trade just with the Steelers was very difficult because the Steelers were reluctant to include a high-caliber receiver back or one that the 49ers wanted back. You would assume like George Pickens, Pat Freiermuth, or something like that. The Steelers, I think rightly so, were unwilling to part ways with those guys, so that was going to be hard to happen, and that's why we were just stuck in the mud for so many days. But then what was even crazier is that the Athletic's Diana Rossini reported that there was a potential 3-team trade that was close to happening between the 49ers, the Broncos, and the Steelers at one point that would have got Brandon Aiyuk over to the Steelers. It included the Denver Broncos, like I said. It would have sent Cortland Sutton to the 49ers, and the Denver Broncos would have gotten a couple of picks, including a 3rd-round pick from the San Francisco 49ers. But obviously, Denver said no to that. I probably would have too, because you're giving up your best receiver for about a 3rd-round pick. The Broncos declined, and it seems like the feeling was that if they would have accepted that, that trade would have happened. They probably wouldn't have extended Aiyuk, and Cortland Sutton would have been on his way to the Niners. Aiyuk would have ended on the Steelers, and we could have been talking about one of the craziest endings that would be fitting to this sort of situation that has just gone on the entire offseason. A lot of twists and turns and just really not knowing how this was going to end. But now Aiyuk stays on the 49ers for the next 4 to 5 years, and it's great for the Niners to get one of these things done, but the other one is still Trent Williams. He is still looking for more guaranteed money on the remaining 2 years of his deal, and there hasn't been too many updates, clearly probably because the 49ers were still trying to work out this Aiyuk deal. Now they got it to turn out in their favor, so doing everything that is possible to get Trent Williams to come back to playing football, I think has to be one of the most important things that any team, I guess, has to deal with now heading into the regular season. And Trent Williams, his age says one thing, but he is definitely not playing like a 36-year-old tackle. He is still considered one of the best tackles, if not the best tackle, but also one of the best players overall on this Niners team. And everybody says it. Anybody that gets a chance to comment on Trent Williams will say that it's night and day when he is in there and when he's not. So playing him, having him play week 1 is going to be absolutely pivotal. And how do they do some salary cap gymnastics here to get the guaranteed money over to Trent Williams? But also, the big question looming over the 49ers now is not anything this year, but next year when Brock Purdy will become eligible to get a contract extension. What do you do from there, right? What do you do from there? Because, yeah, it's early for Brock to want and demand a contract. Like, it's not like he's going to be on the last year of his deal, but then you start having all these questions, right? Do you get him extended now over the fear of seeing the quarterback market jump up again and then having to pay more down the line? Do you wait another year just to see if Brock really is your guy, if anybody still has any doubts about him? But then again, the price could jump up by the time you want to extend him in year 4. And then by then, also, say he does play bad, do you want to extend him? Do you try and reset this whole thing? That is going to be one of the biggest questions next offseason. But for right now, they're lucky they don't have to, address that right away, right, directly. But it also brings into the conversation the other wide receiver on their team, Deebo Samuel. And what does this extension with Brock Purdy's future extension as well, and Trent Williams trying to get more guaranteed money, where does he stand in all of this? And can they pay everybody? Because right now, the 49ers will enter 2024 with 8 players earning an average annual salary of $15 million or more. You have Brandon Aiyuk earning over $15 million, obviously, with his new deal. Nick Bosa, one of the highest paid non-quarterbacks in the NFL, with his previous contract extension. Deebo Samuel is making over $15 million per year. Trent Williams as well. Javon Hargrave, Fred Warner, Christian McCaffrey, and George Kittle are all making big amounts of money, right, for this 49ers, accounting for a lot of their salary cap. And you can't say that none of them deserve it, right? And it is great to have them all still on your team earning this amount of money. But the biggest thing with this, the biggest takeaway, is that it doesn't last forever, right? That's why everybody brings up the Super Bowl window and how long does this 49ers team really have now, because it has been a while that they've been able to have all of these superstars but nothing to show for it in terms of hardware, big time wins in the Super Bowl, right, and things like that. They've been there, but they always seem to fall short. It's hard to bring that up as a negative when you're going up against Patrick Mahomes, but being in there a couple times, you need to win one now. And that's where I'm going with this, right? Because I brought up Deebo Samuel before, and it's an interesting situation too, because he's under contract for the next 2 years, but San Francisco has already seemingly been open to dealing him already this offseason. Around the draft, there were those trade rumors about maybe dealing Brandon Aiyuk, one of them, just to alleviate some of that salary cap potentially, because you know that Brock is going to cost you at least $50 million, if not at least $55 million if he plays well again this year. So you're going to have to give up a lot of money to Brock. And Deebo, you enter a situation now where you're not going to be open about being happy about maybe dealing Deebo Samuel, but with how much you're going to have to give to Brock Purdy, you look at 2025 as one of their best opportunities to deal Deebo Samuel if they feel like that's the best option, because if they trade Deebo Samuel after this year in 2025, they'll be able to save $9 million in cap space to at least help out a little bit with that contract that they're going to have to take up with Brock Purdy. And with that being the case, then there's so much pressure just added onto this year for the 49ers, because it could honestly be the last year when all of these stars are on the same team. It could be their last time all playing an entire season, trying to make another Super Bowl run, all of them as 49ers players, right? I just mentioned all the 8 names that are making a ton of money, and now with Brock still having to be added to that list, someone's going to have to go. Obviously, you can't pay that many players that high of salary each time. So it feels like Deebo is the most likely one just because you're not really going to touch Christian McCaffrey. Same thing with George Kittle. You look at Trent Williams, you're not going to move on from him as well. Then I mentioned Fred Warner. Again, he quarterbacks, captains that defense. It's hard to move on from him. Nick Bosa, earning so much money. You're going to take up a lot of dead money if you just trade him and move on from him. So it feels like Deebo is at that point where he looks like the most expendable option for the 49ers because of the fact that they can save up to $9 million if they trade him. So while this whole thing started with Brandon Aiyuk getting that extension and being a great thing, right, for the 49ers, thinking about it long term, you're able to bring the whole band back together for this year, one last run at this Super Bowl. And to me, it just gives off the main message that they have to win it this year. They just have to, because they're going to be in the same situation next year if they move on from Deebo. Everybody asking the same questions that they did with Brandon Aiyuk this year. Is the Super Bowl window closed with moving on from Deebo? Or do they have enough players on their roster in their wide receiver room to compensate for the loss of a guy like Deebo, similarly to this year with Brandon Aiyuk? All those questions are going to come back up next year, but the difference is that Deebo next year, if you move on from him, it's almost like a necessary thing you're going to have to do because you're going to have to pay Brock at the end of the day. So it feels like, yeah, it's a win right now, but it adds so much pressure this year to the 49ers that this is their last run at it. This is going to be their last chance at most likely having this entire group back at it again. And it's funny because you think about the Super Bowl now, you want to have your chance at it again, but what happens if you play the Chiefs again? It would be awesome to see like a trilogy to all of this, but again, it's almost like, can you slay your demon there in that final battle to finally get that Super Bowl, or are the Chiefs going to create history? I'm thinking so far ahead, but those are the stakes right now for the 49ers. A lot is riding on this season to get that Super Bowl trophy, because if you don't, you're going to see major changes. I don't think they'll get rid of Kyle Shanahan or anything like that, so still trying to keep their Super Bowl window open. They're going to have to make choices, and I think Deebo is going to be one of those expendable pieces, which is unfortunate to say, but that's what eventually happens in the NFL, right? When you have so many stars, paying all of them, it's only temporary, and it's all based on how much success you have in that limited time you have with all these stars. But that's pretty much the short-term and the long-term problems that eventually the 49ers will have to face. It's going to be interesting how this year plays out. It's all going to start in just less than a week from yesterday, 6 days away from the start of the regular season. But moving on to our next break, we're going to come up after that break and talk about Micah Parsons. Some more news about the Cowboys. Nothing too serious, but Micah Parsons did bring up the fact that he wants to see one position in the NFL earn more money. It's not pass rushing. It's not the position that he plays. It's another one that he feels is being a little bit underpaid based on how much they contribute to the game. Stay tuned to find out what group that is after we return after this short break.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Back here now on the show to jump into one interesting statement I saw over the course of these last few days regarding the Cowboys, but nothing too negative on any extensions or anything like that. It still has to do with some money and how much the cornerbacks are earning in this day and age in the NFL, because it seems like each time the salary cap around the entire NFL is visited, it always seems like it gets bumped up, and seemingly every year more and more players get bigger extensions, right? The more the salary cap goes up, the more money goes to a lot of these positions, and most notably it goes to the quarterbacks, the wide receivers, the offensive linemen, the defensive tackles, all those positions that usually are the highest earning. This offseason, we saw most of them go to the quarterbacks, obviously, the wide receivers, and a few offensive linemen thrown in there as well. And those are the positions that are earning the $35 million per year, the $55 million per year, the $28 to $30 million per year. Those are all comprised of the quarterbacks, wide receivers, edge rushers, interior defensive line, and offensive tackles specifically, which means that the other groups like the linebackers, the safeties, the running backs especially, right, are all in a group where they're all not earning any more than around $21, $22 million per year. No player in any of those positions is earning any more than that. So there is a little bit of a discrepancy there, and included in that group is the defensive back position. And while Micah Parsons is obviously the host of his own podcast, he spoke recently about the wide receiver market obviously exploding this offseason, and while he was congratulating and talking about CeeDee Lamb and, getting his money, rightfully so, he brought up the idea of defensive backs also, being included in this discussion of trying to get a little bit of a pay raise here, right? Because in Micah Parsons' idea, one directly affects the other, and there's a big difference in how much each of them are getting paid, especially the best at their position. And he had a lot to say about it, honestly. I will provide you guys what he said here in just a second. If you look at your screen, he started off by saying, I think it's time for a bump to the cornerback market. I mean, all these receivers are making $30 million plus a year, and there's guys on islands because we in man, we in cover 3, we got to be covering these dudes, and I think it's time for the cornerback market to make a jump because these wide receivers is making 30 plus million. I think about offensive tackles, right? That is actually on the next one. It continues. Apologies for that. He said, I think about offensive tackles, right? Offensive tackles are damn near at $28-30 million, and the best pass rushers is, between $25 to $30 million per year on that salary, and it's about $10 to $15 million difference between the top paid defensive back, which is still Jair Alexander, compared to the top earning wide receiver in their market being Justin Jefferson. There's a $14 million difference between the highest earners, and just in general, there's about $10 to $15 million as well difference between some of the other cornerbacks that are getting huge, contracts, huge based on their own markets. AJ Terrell just got his new extension. He's getting paid about $20 million per year. Not really anywhere close to what a guy like Brandon Aiyuk is now getting paid, right? Amon-Ra St. Brown, Jalen Waddle, even guys at $25 million per year earning that much more, being the 10th or 11th highest paid wide receiver in their own market. They're still making $5 to $6 million more than the second or third highest paid corner in the NFL. So there is a bit of a drop off there. So I thought I'd bring this question up. Should the cornerbacks be making more money? And also, who would have to earn less money in the NFL if the corners were to make some more money? Because everything is relatable, right? Everything is connected in a salary cap driven, league. Everything based on the salary cap, and everything is sort of splitting it up amongst your team. The quarterbacks are taking a massive chunk of that pie, that salary cap pie that each team has. So the quarterbacks are taking a lot of it. Defensive tackles are also up there. Most notably, Chris Jones is making $31 million per year, a lot more, or not a lot more, but just more than a lot of wide receivers already in the NFL. Then you look at guys like Nick Bosa earning $34 million per year as well. And some offensive tackles are even making close to $30 million per year. So you look at cornerbacks now, and my thought process around all of this sides a little bit more towards Micah Parsons, just because I've always felt that the quarterback position, it's hard, obviously, right? In layman's terms, it's hard, it's difficult, it's very challenging to decipher yourself as one of the best elite quarterbacks in the division, or just in the NFL, actually, I should say. It's a hard position, right? It's the most important position, you could say. But in my opinion, I think defensive back is the hardest, toughest, most difficult position in the NFL for a couple of reasons over the quarterback spot, just because you look at the responsibilities, the physical toll on what corners have to do, and while the quarterback obviously has to run the whole show, right? I feel like corner is not in that same boat, and it's actually harder because it is so dependent on what offenses do, right? They dictate everything. The corner can only do as much as the offense, the quarterback on the opposing team decides to attack him, right? So with that being the case, you could have the perfect coverage on any wide receiver, but if that ball is in the perfect spot, if the quarterback makes sure he throws it to a spot where only his guy could get it, or it goes out of bounds, corners aren't really able to make a play on it, or it's so perfect that even though they put out their best performance, their best coverage, they still can't do anything about it. And similarly to that, corners, when they do that, you know how hard it is to cover somebody? I've never had to do it, but thinking about mirroring a wide receiver and how good all these wide receivers are in the NFL nowadays, can you only imagine trying to mirror someone for 5 seconds, going step for step? And not even that, but sometimes when these offensive lines are super good and the pass rush just isn't getting there, you're covering these guys for like 7-8 seconds, and it's near impossible if you're playing man, like Micah Parsons mentioned. A lot of the times, it's almost impossible to stay hip for hip, step for step with some of these wide receivers. You're going to have such a short memory, because oftentimes some of the best in the NFL lose a lot of their battles. So you're just going to have to shake that off, even if you give up a big gain or anything like that. Or again, if you have perfect coverage and the ball is just in a perfect spot and you can't do anything about it, you're going to just have to shake that off. And almost like you feel helpless out there, almost like defenders in basketball, right? You always hear the term, that was great defense, that was perfect defense, but it was just a better shot. It's similar to a cornerback in the NFL. And with that all being the case, just even adding on to the fact also that some of the best corners, if they're truly, truly great at man, great at all, their assignments, zone, and just staying disciplined on everything, it's so dependent that the quarterback can just simply look the other way to the other side of the field and say, I'm just not going to throw it to that guy. And then that's great if you're taking away a wide receiver, but at the same time, you can't, fall back on your heels at that point, because if it does come your way and you think it's not going to come your way, then you end up looking even worse, right? You give up a completion and then you might not see another throw for the next quarter and a half or something like that. So it's such a mental, physical battle all rolled into one that I think Micah Parsons does make a point that they should be earning more, but again, I posed that question before. Someone is going to have to make less. And you look at the markets for a lot of these positions, quarterbacks making near $60 million, almost $40 million more than the corners do, the highest earning corners. Yes, the quarterback is super important. No one's considered a contender until they have one of those quarterbacks making that amount of money. But is it $40 million more important than corners? I don't think it should be that big of a difference. That's just me. But it's going to continue to go up just because of how the NFL is played and how much importance and highlighting goes into quarterbacks. So I don't think there'll ever be a situation where they take away from the quarterback position, obviously. Then you look at others like I think defensive tackles could be earning a little less just based on Chris Jones making the most at $31 million. That's a good amount, and he deserved to get paid, but it feels like a lot in that spot, so it is hard. It's all subjective, really, on who you think deserves to be making the most money, but I think corners do deserve to be a little bit closer to some of the pass rushers, some of the offensive linemen in today's NFL, because you look at the next group to probably get played, it'll probably be Sauce Gardner or Pat Surtain to be the highest earning corner, just based on the trajectory that they're going on. They're probably going to get paid and only be earning about $23 million, if that. So with those guys and how important they are to their teams, this Jets defense wouldn't be what it is really without Sauce. And similarly to the Broncos, if they didn't have Pat Surtain, that level of corner, they, again, wouldn't be as formidable, I believe, because it is, again, near impossible to take away and shadow some of these best wide receivers in today's NFL, and those two guys do it better than a lot of people, a lot of corners in the NFL. So all of that is to say that I do agree with Micah, but in reality, it's hard to pick a position that you'd like to take away from. If I were to pick one, it would be quarterback, just because it shouldn't be that big of a difference, especially just because the next guy in line is going to make that money, just showing that maybe they don't deserve that amount of money based on who's getting paid, but that's a whole different conversation, right? But it is all subjective. It lacks, you can see, it just lacks the action at this point and how subjective it is, but it was an interesting point that I thought Micah made. And speaking about other positions getting paid, he is due up for an extension in a couple years now. So he's talking about corners getting paid, right? But if they do get a bump in their pay, someone's going to have to take less. And Micah's not going to be all too happy if pass rushers are suddenly bumped down just to pay corners. But it was an interesting point that I thought I'd highlight on today's show. But with that out of the way now, we can move on to two new topics that we will talk about on today's show. Montez Sweat had some strong words to say about his former team, the Washington Commanders. And what did he say? And just coming off of that, what are the expectations for both this Chicago Bears team and this Commanders team that are very similar to one another here in 2024? We're going to discuss that. Then also continuing on our series on predicting the standings for each division in the NFL. We're going to talk about the NFC West in this division to close everything out. That is coming up in just a few moments. Don't go anywhere.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
We are back here on the show to continue on with a new segment that I will bring up here in just a second, talking about Montez Sweat, a revelation, a game changer this past season for the Chicago Bears. Montez Sweat was traded to the Bears just 10 months ago, but both sides, if you look at the Commanders and the Bears, oddly enough, thinking about it now, again, 10 months from the time that he was traded, in hindsight, both teams are in very similar and very positive places right now based on the offseason, the draft, and everything like that that went down. You would have thought that trading a guy like Montez Sweat would have really sent this Commanders team into a whole spiral, just sending them into a place where it would have looked like a spot where not a lot of teams can dig themselves out of that hole. But again, they are very similar to where they are right now, and based on their expectations and how much excitement there is heading into 2024. But Montez Sweat recently spoke about his old team and how everything went down when he spoke in an interview with the Chicago Sun-Times recently. Montez Sweat, before I get into what he said, he was one of the best pieces for this Commanders team on defense, where they're often struggled a lot of the times with the quarterbacks, the lack of talent on their roster. Montez Sweat, a former 26th overall pick in 2019, he broke out in just his second year with 9 sacks, had another great year just after that in 2022 with 28 quarterback hits and 14 tackles for loss. But like I said, having great seasons, great production from a first-round pick, but Washington was 28, 45, and 1 during that time that Montez Sweat was there. So you weren't really moving anywhere with Montez Sweat being a high-value player, but overall as a team, you were still struggling. So they decided to trade him with how everything played out in that final year with Ron Rivera and getting a new owner after Dan Snyder and everything that happened with him, bringing in Josh Harris and all these guys, new guys just from the organization down to the players. In that sort of those actions, you traded Montez Sweat as well, and now he ends up with the Bears and has a great second half to the year last year with, in 9 games, he produced 25 tackles, 6 sacks, just 6 sacks with the Bears, 6.5 with Washington, bringing him to a total of 12.5 last year, and 4 tackles for a loss. Within those 9 games, the Chicago Bears defense was considered one of the best defenses in the NFL at that time based on the stats, the production that they had out there. Montez Sweat really made a big difference for this team, and now reflecting on his time and just how crazy these last 10 months were, Montez Sweat started off one of his statements by saying, "I definitely made a transition to a better spot for me. Shoot, this was my first Pro Bowl and first double-digit sack year, and all those type of things. I notched some accolades that I also had aspirations of getting, but never reached in Washington. You could definitely say it worked out better for me here," and it's hard to argue with him based on all the stats that I just provided on Montez Sweat this past year. But he didn't stop there. He didn't stop there because he went a little bit further talking about the Commanders and what really went down with them while he was on their team. He said, it was a toxic heavy toll just losing and people around you being kind of okay with losing. It could sometimes rub off on you. You've got to stay hungry and know that you want to win. That's what Montez Sweat said on really what was going on there with the Washington Commanders. And while it does paint the Washington Commanders in a bad light, some people might say that's fair because, really looking at that team during 2019 to just last year or 2022, they were in a very bad spot where I've mentioned before that it's one thing to be bad, but they were so bad to a point where it was almost irrelevant, or just whatever they did, whatever sort of changes they made in the offseason, it was irrelevant because you always knew that they were just going to be a bottom tier, just not very exciting team to follow. And that's the worst you could get to in the NFL, right? Just having no hope, no excitement heading into the next year because you're stuck in a place where you can't really help yourself too much. And that's where the Commanders were for a while over the last few years. But now, like I said, they brought in a whole boatload of new administrators, some new players. Dan Snyder goes out. Now Josh Harris comes in as the new owner. You bring in Dan Quinn as the new head coach. Same thing for a new general manager in Adam Peters. You bring in so many new players just this offseason to really make you just excited, plain and simple. You haven't had that with the Commanders in a while. And now, based on what Montez Sweat is saying, how much better everything is in Chicago, really looking at this team, and both of them actually now bringing in the Commanders and the Bears into this situation, I think they're very similar. They're very similar, and I mentioned that at the start of this segment, that they're not too far off because you look at, other than the fact that they both drafted generational type of quarterbacks, both of them have very good outlooks that they are going to be very successful in the NFL just based on the preseason and their college careers and everything like that. Probably the 2 best quarterbacks in this rookie class. So having both of them is one of their similarities, but other than that, you saw the huge change in both of their rosters, with the Bears bringing in DJ Moore, Keenan, DeAndre Swift, just guys on both sides of the football that are game changers right away and that are meant to be there to help their rookie quarterbacks. And similarly to the Commanders, they bring in guys like Cameron Curl, Jeremy Chin, I wanted to say. Then also Bobby Wagner, Austin Eckler, Nick Allegretti on the offensive line, Dorrance Armstrong, Dante Fowler Jr. All those guys are going to be a tremendous help for this Commanders team, similarly to the Chicago Bears bringing in all the players that they did. So now it makes me think that how Montez Sweat was talking, how it's so much better in Chicago. They're right there, I think, in terms of an outlook for 2024. And if I were to ask the question, who is looking more likely to make it further this year based on what we know about each of these teams right now and how they're projected to finish this year, I talked about both of these teams already in my final standing predictions for each division. And I feel like, just directly answering this question, I feel like the Commanders could arguably finish with a better situation towards the playoffs than the Chicago Bears, just because I think it has a lot to do with each of their divisions, right? You look at the NFC North, and I predicted that the Bears would finish third just a few days ago when I started these predictions. I thought the Bears would finish third, and I had the Commanders finishing second in large part because of their divisions, right? You look at the NFC North, it's hard for the Bears, at least for me, to get convinced that they're going to be better than either the Lions or the Green Bay Packers in their division right off of the bat starting this new project. So that's one thing. And then with the Commanders, just their situation in the NFC East is a little bit better because the Giants, I don't think anyone's got aspirations for them to finish first or second. Then you look at the Cowboys and how shaky they're looking now heading into the regular season. Then also you have the Eagles, who I have penciled in as first, and then it leaves the Commanders, where if they play their chips right, and I don't think they have such a uphill battle compared to that of the Chicago Bears, because they only really have to worry about the Cowboys for finishing second, where the Bears are battling with the Packers and the Lions, two of the best teams arguably that people have projected to be in 2024. So that's a major part of this and how those games go within the division. Those are monumental games that I think with such a young team in the Bears, I think it could cost them a lot of the time, and it could lead to the fact that the Commanders could finish higher than them this year in 2024. But on the flip side, if you look at them, position for position, you could arguably say that the Bears have a better team than the Commanders do, but that's not the question. The question is who's going to make it further, and I just feel like the Commanders have more going in their benefit to their strengths based heavily on their roster and heavily on who they're playing in their schedule this year. That has a lot to do with it. Finishing second or third in your division is going to make a huge difference when you're trying to make it into the playoffs, and both of them have their quarterbacks for the future. Both of them have exciting pieces on each side, but overall, it's who you're playing, how your schedule shapes out, and the Bears have a little bit tougher challenge to me to get over, and I just don't see it happening in their first year. So the Commanders, to me, could finish better than the Chicago Bears, and it's not an indictment against the Bears, it's just the divisions and how it all shakes out. But I could be wrong. The Bears, I'm high on them, but dealing with the Lions and the Packers just as they're hitting their stride is a huge ask. So feel free for you guys to leave your comments in the comment section using the super chat button. Let me know how you feel on this topic. Do you feel like the Commanders have no shot of finishing better than the Bears, or do you agree with me? At least see my point a little bit in this discussion. But anyway, we have one more topic to get to on talking about the division and how hard some of these are. We're going to wrap up the NFC, talking about the NFC West and giving you guys my predictions on how I see that division shaking out in 2024. So we'll be right back with predicting the final standings for the NFC West. Thank you for joining me on the last segment to wrap up the NFC West in my final divisional predictions for 2024, but also the final segment to wrap up this week, talking about my predictions for this division. It wasn't as hard, I believe, as the other ones, just because I think this one's a little bit more clear-cut, but there could be some surprises in here depending on how certain things shape out for the Cardinals, the Seahawks, the Rams, and the 49ers. But with that being said, I have the Arizona Cardinals finishing as the last place team in the NFC West. I don't think that's too big of a surprise for a lot of people, just because the biggest thing that I've noticed with this Cardinals team is just the defensive weak spots that you're able to pick out right away. And I'll mention that in just a second. But on top of that, you finished 4-13 last year. I think this team is definitely better than a 4-13 team right away when you think about it. But when you think about a 4-13 team, a big part of that for the Cardinals in this case was that Kyler Murray, suffered that knee injury and that he missed the entire first half of the year trying to come back from that. And then when he did, this Cardinals team was not that bad, to suggest that they're awful, finishing 4-13, right? They were able to discover their new star tight end in Trey McBride. On offense, James Conner had one of the best years of his career with 1,000 yards rushing and 7 touchdowns with less than a stellar offensive line on top of that. So he was able to produce at that level. You have Trey McBride. Now you have Marvin Harrison Jr. coming in. It's looking a lot more promising on offense, right, to say the least, with Kyler coming back, more weapons around him. It should look better on that side of the ball, but now I get to those defensive concerns that I mentioned with this team, right, talking about really one of the biggest things is the lack of pass rush, especially when last year they had their highest amount of sacks at 6 with one of their players. That's just not going to cut it, especially in this division, right? There's too much offense from just the 49ers alone. Then you get to the Rams and even the Seahawks with DK and Jackson Smith and Jigba and Kenneth Walker. There's a lot of offense just in this division to not have a defense that is able to hold up against some of that firepower. So more in depth on this defense, right? The stats don't really back it up too much. They ultimately allowed 355 yards per game last year, which was 24th in the NFL. Then they were also last in rushing yards allowed, averaging about 143 rushing yards per game on average allowed to opposing teams. Then also allowing the second most points per game at 26.8 in the NFL last year, only ahead of the Washington Commanders that came in last. So yes, their offense is exciting. Yes, you hear some of the quotes from Kyler and other Cardinals players saying that people are sleeping on them. Let them sleep. We're just going to prove them wrong. It's exciting. I like Jonathan Gannon as well, but the defensive side of the ball needs to get better other than just a guy like Budda Baker and guys like that. It feels like they need a top-tier pass rusher, especially in this division, to get after some of the best quarterbacks like Stafford and Brock Purdy, and even Geno Smith. He's not a bad quarterback by any means. So you need that especially, and that's one of the things that I still believe that can hold the Cardinals back this year, but not too far ahead of them because, again, I thought it was pretty clear-cut from 3-4 and 1-2. The next team I wanted to mention is the Seattle Seahawks. I feel like they're going to finish third once again, and the two main things that stick out to me is the fact that they brought in 2 new coordinators, and on top of that, also a new head coach. So they're bringing in a whole lot of a new regime, new protocol, new system and routines coming into this team that you're going to have to change based on Pete Carroll. And I mentioned that because Pete Carroll, how long he's been the Seattle Seahawks coach and how long you were able to deal with that stability, that control that you got from him. He's got a higher off his role now. I'm told by the reports that I've read, but it's different. It's different making that transition. I like Mike McDonald coming over from the Ravens, but even still, it's a lot of change just from one year to the next. And then the next thing that sticks out is the fact that Geno Smith, he's still a quarterback. I'm not saying that he should be out or anything like that right away, but is he the long-term option, especially for this team, again, that I mentioned, are entering this new era with a new head coach, new offensive coordinator, and things like that. Usually when you get something like that, it always feels like the new head coach, the new offensive coordinator, they need to have their system excel, and I just wonder if Geno Smith is that guy to operate in this system right away, because you look at their new offensive coordinator that came in, Ryan Grubb. He was hired from the University of Washington, and then you just look at what they were dealing with in terms of offense and how explosive and exciting they were, having Michael Penix in at quarterback and Rome Odunze in there, and the two other receivers that I'm forgetting their name right now, but they were also very good for that Washington offense. And not to say that they don't have the DKs, the Jackson Smith and Jigbas of the world, right? But their quarterback, Geno, Michael Penix, you feel like there's a little bit more excitement there with Michael, with more of an opportunity to excel in an offense like this, right? Where now, Geno, it's a little bit of murky waters with him, right? Because he is entering a big third year for him in the last contract that he got. The first year as the starter, he played very well, lights out. He earned that contract extension, but then the following year he had a dip. You finish with the exact same record, and then now you're heading into this year, whole new operating system, new coaches and everything like that. It doesn't look like they're going to come to an extension of some sorts, which could mean shortly down the road, the Seahawks could be looking for a new quarterback, and that's why I'm a little bit questionable, a little bit suspect of Geno Smith really being the guy to take them further than what they've been right now, because they have good players on this team. I mentioned on the offensive side of the ball. On the other side, Devin Witherspoon, Tariq Woolen, Leonard Williams also on that defensive line. They just drafted Byron Murphy as well, a defensive tackle. They have good players, but missing that quarterback is something that, again, especially in this division, it could hold you back, and it is something that becomes a very noticeable thing when you have the Staffords, the Purdys putting up these numbers and winning games. If you don't have a quarterback to go toe-to-toe with them, you're not going to have as much success as those teams. But that alludes to my next team that I want to bring up here, right? The Los Angeles Rams. I wanted to put in a surprise here, maybe finishing first for the Rams, but I feel like with Aaron Donald retiring, and their defense isn't just going to fall off the face of the earth or anything like that, but you're going to have some struggles, some growing pains there without Aaron Donald and how just dominant he was. Guys like Kobe Turner, Byron Young weren't really the main focus of this defense right away, because obviously you have a Hall of Famer there that you have to worry about. But now that he is gone, maybe Kobe Turner faces some more double teams there in the middle of that defensive line. Byron Young has to take up more of a leadership role. I'm confident that he's able to do that, but it is something new without having the voice of Aaron Donald there, right? They were a playoff team last year, which is, promising, right? Surprising a lot of people with a 10-7 record. Puka breaking out and, adding to the offensive weapons that they have with Cooper Kupp, Kyron Williams, now Puka, all being on the receiving end of Matthew Stafford, and him at quarterback, always deemed the most underrated quarterback, one of the most talented in the NFL. So they even added a lot on their defense, but now dealing with the expectations and also staying healthy, because Kyron, Cooper Kupp, Puka now even have been dealing with some injuries that you don't want to see pop up again. And even Matthew Stafford at I want to say 36, 35 years old, isn't getting to a position where injuries aren't going to pop up. So that really just remains a concern for me. They have the 12th hardest schedule in the NFL, which is tied with the 49ers. So it's not a schedule thing. It's just the fact that I really need to be convinced to see the Rams take that next step. They're right there. I think a lot of teams are picking them as a surprise team, as a contending team, a surprise contending team, but I need to see them go head-to-head with the 49ers and really give them a good run for their money before I could have actually put them there, and now that's not going to happen, but I felt like this was the decision that felt most appropriate to me. The Rams are a good team. They're gonna have a good record, but in terms of just the division, it's hard to compete with the next team, obviously at number 1. The 49ers just getting rid of that situation with Brandon Aiyuk, now moving on from him. Still need Trent Williams back, but I think bringing the whole squad back, really for the most part, is an awesome sign for them, right, in their quest to finally get a Super Bowl. Kyle Shanahan has had multiple opportunities of getting that first Super Bowl for himself, and now this team, this core group of players, the Warners, the Debos, the Trent Williams, the George Kittles, they've had multiple opportunities now as well, and how much are you going to keep banging on that door before you either break it down, which I hope happens because I think they deserved it, but also on the flip side, you could keep banging on that door to just realize that no one is coming to it and no one's going to answer your numerous calls at that door. So it is something that now the biggest thing with them, the biggest downside I guess I could point out to the fact is that, it's time now. You have to go out there and win it. You have to go out there and validate this group of players that you have, because if you don't get a championship, a Super Bowl with this team, it's going to look like such a big letdown with constantly being one of the best teams in the NFL, the best team in the NFC. If you don't have anything to show for it, it's hard to validate how dominant you were without having that silverware. That's just how people base things off of. Not to say that it's wrong, but you'd like to see people talk about this 49ers team in a better light, and the pressure, the expectation they have to win this year, it is huge. It's a lot this year, even more so than ever before, just because, like I mentioned to start this segment, or to start this episode, this could be the last run of it with this group of guys. So you have to win this year. You have to get there. And obviously winning the division is not looked upon as a must-have if you're going to end up winning the Super Bowl, but it's definitely going to be noticeable if you don't win this division. And now you have all these questions popping up of, is this 49ers team just not going to win anything? They weren't even able to win the division. How could we say that they're going to win the Super Bowl? Those are the type of questions you start to ask with the 49ers if they don't win the NFC West. But they have enough to do it. They did it last year. They're bringing back the same team. So I'm confident that they're going to win it. They're probably going to make the Super Bowl. It's probably between them, the Packers, and the Lions. They were tough games last year, but the 49ers were able to beat both those two teams exactly. So we'll see how it all plays out. They're my predicted NFC West champions yet again, but leave your guys' thoughts on if you agree with me, you think the Rams actually have a better shot this year than years before. I'd love to know what you guys think on this live episode, or just leaving it in the comments in general. But that'll do it for today's show. That'll wrap up the whole week on this episode of the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. Thank you guys for joining. Please remember to like, follow, and subscribe to the show, as well as following the network on all forms of social media. And check out more content around this show and around the NFL on both YouTube channels surrounding the GSMC Podcast Network. And lastly, remember to tune in every weekday at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time for more live episodes of the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast. I hope you guys all have a great weekend, have a great Labor Day weekend, and don't forget to come back here next week and join me again for the first week of the NFL regular season. You guys go have a great weekend.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn, ain't that great.